Hello and welcome. My name's Andy Reid. I'm the director of the Sports Think Tank, and today we're joining one of the 29 organisations that have helped us in our 2024 manifesto project. We were challenged to come up with policy ideas for a new government after the next election, which would probably not have great resource implications. As we all know, the economy and the public finances are in a position where spending is going to be very difficult for the next period. So these individual organisations have come together. We've created a pamphlet which is available on our website, but we wanted to give each of the contributors a little bit more time to expand on what they're trying to say in their chapter. So let's head over to the next one in this series of this Sports Think Tank 2024 manifesto. Well, hello and welcome to the latest podcast. Today, I'm really delighted to be joined by probably a friend of mine, those who we've worked so closely together over the last few years, but also, a great organisation. But I want to always, as I do with these, hand over to Tom Burstow from Sported to introduce himself and also the organisation. I think we've learned through this process that not even all the organisations within the 29 chapters know each other all that well. So don't hold back, Tom. Talk us about your journey into Sported and then sort of a little bit about what the organisation does. And then we'll dive into some of the great ideas that you've been pulling out in what you've been saying.
Fantastic. Andy, great to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity. My name's Tom Burstow. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive at Sported. I've been with Sported about 7 years now, coming from a background in sport for development, also at UNICEF UK, where I was heavily involved in the major events around the Olympic legacy of London 2012 and then the Commonwealth Games. So I've seen over the years the role of sport for development change and the understanding and the recognition of the value of it grow. And that's what's really exciting about the work that you're doing and leading us in as a sector. So Sported is an organisation focused on the intentional use of sport for social change. And we're passionate about unlocking the opportunity for all young people to benefit from sport and the potential that it brings in their lives. And the way that we do that at Sported is through the support of 3,000 community organisations right across the UK, all of whom use sport for social change. So they operate in every different corner of the UK. Between them, they operate nearly 100 different sport or physical activities, from things like parkour, Zumba, fly fishing, boccia, surfing, go-karting, all sorts of weird and wonderful things, as well as your traditional, football and rugby and so on. But they all use those for one of 5 social outcomes. So that might be around crime and antisocial behaviour, education, employability, inequality of access, a variety of different things. And we're really excited about the amazing work that they do. They're led by inspirational local leaders, people who see the challenge that young people face locally and determine that sport or physical activity can play a role in dealing with those issues. So the work that we do is to try and help those organisations to survive and thrive. The vast majority of them, 60%, are run by volunteers, so they have no paid staff. More than a third of them are operating in areas of the highest deprivation in the UK. And again, nearly half of them have an income of less than £10,000 a year. So on the one hand, they're these incredible assets at a community level who deliver the most amazing impact in an often a hyper-local kind of way. But on the other, they're extremely fragile. And so the work that Sported does is to help them to exist. We do that through a free membership that we offer them so they can access all sorts of things that allow them to succeed as an organisation, things that they really struggle with, all the perhaps boring things that make an organisation work well, things like governance, finance, strategy, business planning, volunteering, marketing, and of course fundraising, which is one of the biggest things for them, as you can imagine. We support them with all of those things through a range of different resources they can access, including our volunteer network who come in and provide them directly with those skills. We also, they want to help them to access opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise be able to access because they're so small and kind of hyper-local in many cases. They often fly under the radar, and that's of their NGBs if they're a single sport organisation, or it might be of the local authority, or it might be of funders who they should perhaps be accessing funding from as well. So our role is to identify and support them in trying to access the support that they deserve. And so we're truly passionate about who they are and what they do and the role that they play. And our support of the coalition is really to ensure that this part of the sports sector is properly recognised for the ability that it brings in creating impact in a very cost-effective way. So the manifesto is a great example of how we can come together and demonstrate that, hopefully to government, in a way that might unlock further support in whatever form going forward.
Tom, that is absolutely brilliant. That's great. I've absolutely heard of both thoughtful development in your own organisation, but also probably just highlighting. I think you use the word under the radar, but I still find, and you probably still do, when you're in other forums in the sports sector, across the piece that we brought together here, from play right through to elite sport, it is probably under the radar even of large parts of our own sector, isn't it? Is they don't probably
Yeah.
quite understand what you've just described. So, do
Mm.
you want to go a little bit deeper in what one of these, probably quite often it is, isn't it? Is one or two locally trusted leaders who've come up with initiatives, they know the community, they've co created something in that community, it is hyper local. So they just don't have access to the whole network upwards, isn't it? That's partly why you exist and Sport for Development and others. But if you just want to describe one or two of those projects, bring it to life for people to understand what that challenge looks like and how part time these people are compared to
Yeah.
sort of, our reasonably well-funded other organisations in the same community.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. It's really helpful. And one of the descriptions I've found helpful in the last few years has been talking about traditional structures versus alternative structures.
Yeah,
By traditional, we're meaning the sort of NGB networks of organisations and the role that they play, the way that they work. Many of the groups that we work with are entirely different to that, as you said, on the basis of how they were formed, why they were formed, and what they go to deliver. I'll give you a great example. There's a group called Par Sports in St Helens, an extremely deprived community. All youth provision has been removed. Lots of challenges around crime, antisocial behaviour, drugs, youth violence, unemployment, anything pretty much you can name it. And an amazing local man there recognised sort of, well, 12, 15 years ago now, the potential there was to sort of try and do something through sport. The recognition that sport is the hook, as we all know and believe, into delivering social change. So he just said, I'm going to try and do something. So set up something one afternoon.
yeah,
Thought no one would come. I think 5 kids came. The next week, 10 kids came. A month goes on, and he starts thinking, "I need somewhere to do this. I'm just doing it in the middle of nowhere, kind of thing." So accessed an old shipping container somehow. Don't ask me how. And started operating from there for a number of months, and was growing the number of young people that were coming. They were finding it a real distraction from the negative behaviours they were involved with. They were enjoying being together in a sort of positive environment. Parents were recognising, actually, this is a really good thing we should be
mm,
doing. Sported got involved, as we often do, at the point where groups move from being something that's someone's idea and they've just sort of started organically into saying, well, actually, we need some form of structure around this. We need, some safeguarding. We need some governance. We need some support with funding. We need to grow. We need to, all of those kind of questions. And we've helped that group alongside others to have become a place where now they have their own facility. They've accessed their own mugger. They work with a pupil referral unit next door. They receive 400 to 500 young people a week, plus their families. There's a community hub that operates there, which is serving drinks and food and food provision at lots of points. And it's the hub of the community. It genuinely is. And the work that they're doing there is supporting in all those areas I mentioned around crime, around community cohesion, around food provision, around education, employability. And it's just a wonderful example of something that was really just set up to tackle an issue with the sport as the vehicle, nothing more. They've
mm,
not created any, sort of national boxing champions or football champions or anything, but they have created something that is a critical asset and lifeline for the people in that community. So if you replicate that across the UK, a variety of different sports, different contexts where the issues might be, different. It's just a phenomenal network of those. But as I say, they probably wouldn't be or wouldn't have been known by a national governing body. They
mm.
wouldn't have found it easy to access local authority funding or national lottery funding, even in the initial terms, or Sport England funding. That's all changed for them now as they've grown. But we want to act as that intermediary, that bridging of the gap that often exists between the little guys who are doing this amazing work and those that want to reach them, quite frankly, because there are they often involve underrepresented audiences that are referenced in the government's Get Active strategy and, community strategies that exist with companies and with other national institutions. So our role is really to try and make sure that we can support them individually, but also collectively act as their voice and ensure that they do get the support and the opportunity to work with those organisations that they should do.
Brilliant, Tom. And that's a really good example. And what growth! And that's phenomenal, isn't it? And there's two things that sort of come out of that really for me. And this is the bit perhaps some parts of the sector don't quite understand. You described, I think we said at the launch of our latest sort of research, isn't it, with the pictures in the booklet we'd produced, is people not just necessarily just doing sport. I mean, that social community cohesion, the food, the poverty. So you're working in areas where there are so many other constraints that, just badgering people to get fit or to go and get involved in sport is a million miles off their radar, isn't it? And what you've got is these people who understand those communities and are embedded right at the heart of them. And they're not traditional sport settings. So, I like that. I love that. A shipping container is the starting point of that journey. So there are two things that strike me with this. It's that why you're valuable is that I've learned over the years, it takes quite a long time for somebody to get connected, even locally. And if these are people who have got busy lives elsewhere, trying to network locally with local councillors, with the local authority, with the local national governing bodies and their representatives locally, that's almost like not a full-time job, but you really need to do that, don't you? And then the second bit is that other piece that you talked about, which we'll probably pick on a little bit more. But in terms of the drift of national policy, is moving in this direction, isn't it, around wanting to understand the social outcomes and reach those groups that, if we're being perfectly frank, as some of the other chapters from like Sporting Equals and Activity Alliance and Women in Sport highlight, we've got some good words around, but we haven't really delivered the most challenging communities, have we? So on that first bit, describe the sort of journey really about how you get alongside a really committed leader who can do that. And I suppose I'm doing it in threes here. The third point, I suppose, is these aren't always replicable, are they? So sometimes people always say, "Oh, here's a really great example of so and so doing some really great work. If anyone could replicate across that," but it's the individual leader who quite often is the bit that make this work, and for the community, it only works in the community they're at and with the community group they're working with, doesn't it? So we can't always replicate these. So we do need to just support really good stuff that's working and not always franchise it or scale it up. It just works because it does. So sorry, there's three bits there, but I'll give you an opportunity to unpick. And then we'll talk about
three bits there.
The wider cross-departmental benefits, as you said.
Okay, so from a sort of connection point, I suppose we often come alongside groups through word of mouth. They'll reach out to us as they recognise that they need support. I think it's interesting for us to consider our I mentioned we have 3,000 groups, and they span from, if you consider the spectrum of them, they span from those that are quite sporty, let's say, who are increasingly recognising the potential of sport as a vehicle for social change. So maybe had more of an intention around the sport initially, versus those that actually are probably more of our bread and butter, who are those that are, about social outcomes and recognise sport as a means of delivering on that. So at that end, you're dealing with youth groups, you're dealing with faith groups, your community clubs that do a range of different things, and therefore sport is just one aspect of that. So food would be another, or just gathering together in a variety of contexts. Yeah. And that's really interesting for us because often they are multi-sport. So almost half of Sports' network are multi-sport. Therefore, there is no natural home for them with a national governing body. And actually they fall outside of any sort of basket, really, effectively, for in terms of people looking after them. So that's particularly valuable to us in terms of sort of promoting the work that they do. And also from an NGB perspective or from a government perspective, they tend to be much more diverse in terms of the nature of the people that are involved in them. And you could argue may have more opportunity to create more activity through them. So we've done a lot of work with some NGBs, for example, table tennis in Birmingham, where we created a hub and spokes model with a group that at the centre who were involved with table tennis, really interested in it, but a number of other groups around them in the vicinity, in the community, who weren't anything to do with table tennis, nor even to do with sport, quite frankly, but actually got engaged through this group, sort of saying to them, "Hey guys, we've been using this in this way, and here's how it's helping us." So I think there's some great practice that exists or can exist from the bottom up, where you engage a group that is, has that connection locally, that has that trusted authority locally to be able to sort of introduce activities in a way that really works for groups. You're right in the sense that it's not always replicable. So despite giving that example of, a hub and spokes thing, it is about leaders and it is about their energy. One thing we do find though is bringing those leaders together is a really powerful means of sharing great stuff that's happening. Because although the context might be different, the sport might be different, actually a lot of the principles of how this works for groups are the same. In terms of the approach towards the young people, in terms of the intentionality around the social outcome being the centre rather than the sport. So there's a lot that our groups learn. They don't always say to us, just put me together with another boxing club. That's not the be all and end all for them. It's much more about how do you use your facility to make the very most of this, or how do you engage those around you that might not be involved in sport right now. And I think that's a key part of it for us, Andy, is about that whole family piece. I
Yeah.
mentioned that power sports example earlier on. It's not just about the young people involved there. It is about the whole family. It's about the whole community. And that engagement becomes really possible. There's another example in the northwest of one of our groups, Abraham Moss Warriors, and all the young people are playing sport, but actually there's probably 20 plus different nationalities on the pitch, and therefore 20 plus different nationalities of parents along the on the touchline, right? And so the group leader recognised, well, there's a real opportunity there to bring the community together by creating some activities. Language is an issue,
Mm.
but actually, while there's some activities where we can bring them together, either to start getting active themselves. So there's been some work that goes on at the same time as the young people are training, that there's some stuff for the adults to do, to parents to do, or through volunteering activities, so improving the local park or some of the spaces that the young people use. So we see that sort of social outcome piece in a variety of different ways. And what I love about the network that we operate is just the creativity and the innovation in organisations that have almost no money, but lots of goodwill, lots of understanding of what's required, and the ability to make that happen. So that's the bit that we want to really see invested in is to say, well, actually, when we empower local communities, we give them the opportunity to really make that change. And for government at a time of such financial austerity, the potential of doing that seems to me something that should really resonate. So our question is, how do we really make that case most effectively? And I know this is the challenge of the coalition, isn't it? To really unlock that support from across government, both locally and nationally, to ensure that those groups have all that they need to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was the challenge, I suppose, with this particular project is that quite clearly there isn't going to be, given the financial situation in the country, there isn't going to be lots of new money for the foreseeable future.
No.
So how do we get more out of existing funding, or how do we get more out of the existing sort of structures? Are there marginal gains we sort of
Mm.
termed it in terms of just trying to change either policy or regulation or other things? And if you can just tweak stuff, all of those 130 ideas could build up to not
Yeah,
the equivalent of money,
absolutely.
but could make a change. So I suppose from your point of view, you've mentioned levelling up and you've mentioned the sort of wider society problems. I mean, clearly this is not just about a DCMS either, is it? I mean, much of the work that you're doing, I sort of see the stuff around justice, around education, we're delivering to other agendas, aren't we? So so it is changing that emphasis about saying, yeah, there will some people it is about sport, but others it's that intentional use of the sport to do other things. And so
Yeah.
these things are delivering cost savings, or others right across the board in a way I think other parts of the sector probably can't quite claim so easily. So I suppose the 2 points is how do you help us to sort of make the case? And I know you do this through surveys around things like the cost of living and understanding the lives of the people that are in these communities. Then I suppose more importantly, how do we then make that case? I don't want additional funding per se, but we need people to recognise these groups do need help and assistance at that level as well. It does need
Mm.
resources, doesn't it? Because these leaders do make things work, but just imagine how much they could make things work if they got the right resources to do it. So I suppose it's that connecting into the sort of it is a bit political, I suppose, but the wider context of the problems that these groups and these communities face as part of that
Yeah.
levelling up agenda. So I think you're speaking into that as much as you are to the DCMS strategy, aren't you?
Exactly, exactly. And we've seen a lot of that. We like you saw the Get Active strategy and the focus on moving inactive people towards physical activity. And as we've all said, the intention there is great. It's
Yeah.
absolutely right, and we totally recognise that. I think the big question is that many of us have raised is how does that happen, and who is it happening with? And I think that's the big challenge that has yet to have been worked through or sufficiently understood. And I think that's the role that we believe we can play, we as a sector can really play in doing that, because the experience has been that national governing bodies have tried some of that work, and some of them for a long time, and have found it difficult, if we're honest, in many cases. And we recognise that a lot of this relies on trusted relationships. It relies on local knowledge and local input to be able to make things work. New formats, new times, new amounts of the costs associated with it. Just a different approach to it, less competitive. All of those things sort of play into the ability to attract people that aren't naturally physically active or engaged in sport, but could be interested in getting involved in something that feels different to them, and but is tailored towards them.
Yeah.
So I think we've got to sort of consider those alternative structures and the role that they play in being able to deliver that really clearly. So yes, you're right. We do a lot of surveying work to help sort of back up what we do, given we have such a large network. And part of the reason for that is we still believe that sport for development is the best kept secret that exists within government, within corporate funding, within trusts and foundations. When you look across the different levels of investment that exist, it's a fraction of corporate sponsorship that goes into sport goes towards sport for development. It's similarly a tiny fraction. We've seen good things with the Ministry of Justice, but again, very little from government going directly into the development piece of sport. And you'll know the survey, the social return on investment survey, that says for every pound invested in sport for development, £6 is returned for all the benefits that it brings. So for us, in a sense, it's a no-brainer, but we know we have to keep telling that story and keep identifying why and how it makes such a difference. There are lots of things that can be done that are tweaks that can make a big difference.
Yeah.
And one of the first, though, is the recognition of just what sport does impact across those social outcomes. We really want that to be recognised. And when we surveyed our groups recently, over half of them said that's the biggest thing we want, is just for our constituents to understand that this we can help in these areas, because there's a consideration that perhaps this is just about sport. That's fine, but we've got bigger things to worry about over here, which are crime and health and and employability. And they say, well, hang on a minute, that's what we're doing here, right? So it's joining those dots is a key part of what we're all trying to do. In terms of more practical tweaks, 92% of our group said, can you make it easier to work with you? So through application forms, through the programs that you're running, there is money that is already being delivered, as you know, through Holiday Activity Fund, through the Open School Facilities Fund. There are programs and there are grant funding initiatives out there. But our groups often often they don't find them because they're not considered for them. They wouldn't look on a local authority website necessarily, or even Sports England necessarily. They wouldn't necessarily be able to respond fully to the application form. They're volunteers, as we've said. English might not be their first language. There might be a deadline for it that they can't meet. They might be required to front money in advance. All of those things are big barriers to them to being able to respond to those things. So something around making that process of engaging with funders or partners easier is really vital. And again, people like ourselves and Street Games and others across the sector do exactly that kind of work in helping to bridge that gap. That's really important. But then there are other quick wins. Opening school facilities is an obvious one. 60% of our group said, we see this fragmented nature of school openings, but we can see these amazing facilities that sit behind the school gates that we can't access afterwards. Meanwhile, we don't have our own facility. We're struggling all the time with something that's appropriate and safe and cheap enough for us to operate. So that's one that I know has been talked about a lot, but again, makes a big difference to our groups. And then tax relief, providing tax relief for those that do have their own facility, but currently aren't exempt from the things in the way that others are. So those are just a couple of examples of the kinds of small shifts that would make a disproportionate difference to these groups that are operating on sort of blood, sweat, and tears basically most of the time. So.
But they're good examples, and they're also examples of unintended consequences of other policy shifts, aren't they? So probably just around the schools agenda, a move from local authority-led schools in your locality to academies and free schools, etc. So I've talked on international stages before where they just can't believe they think, well, you own your schools, don't you? Can't you just order them to open up? And
Yeah,
when you try to explain, it's not quite so easy as that. They just wonder why, but they're yours,
no,
and they're still the states,
exactly.
aren't they? Okay, yeah. Actually, if you look at it, well, sometimes you need to take a big step back, don't you? Because you're dealing with
Yeah,
the minutiae of trying to open up school facilities, actually, but there's a fundamental policy thing, isn't there, at the centre of what the
yeah.
relationship is between the centre and all its schools and local authorities, etc. So there are some wins there, sort of, for you
Mm,
that we can really help with as well in other areas. It's not just in sort of DCMS, as I said. And I suppose the other thing sort of you picked up, this is not a criticism of national governing bodies, is it? But I think you're quite right, is that more often those groups, we haven't succeeded in shifting the dial because they don't quite understand some of those communities, and some of those communities don't quite trust people just coming in.
yeah,
So I think the best NGBs will probably have best practice where they partner with these organisations, as you've said. So it'd be useful to see if you could highlight one or two of those good NGBs that have done that. And I suppose the other bit is I get frustrated a little bit, and this is the bit I know I've been talking to you and others about corporate fundraising. It does seem easier for to set up another program, stick their t-shirts on a bunch of kids, take the
mm,
photos, and move on. Whereas actually these groups could really deliver what some really good stuff for corporates who want to invest in their communities. Don't go away and invent something else.
yeah.
As you say, there's 3,000 community organisations out there desperate for that sort of partnership. So how do we help bridge that to give them the outcomes they'd like to see and the credibility, which I'm sure that what you bring, but the credibility that we can deliver.
Yeah,
So just two little bits there,
absolutely.
aren't there? Sorry, I don't mean twos, but
That's all right. No, that's all
hopefully
right.
you're helping the conversation flow really well to highlight some of these bits, and they keep popping up other
That's
ideas.
good. No, that's good. So NGBs is an interesting one. So you're absolutely right. NGBs are in a difficult position. So many things to deal with.
Mm,
Within the current network, within their sport, never mind the sort of growth of and
yeah,
diversification of that. So
yeah,
one of the things we've done quite a lot with NGBs is insight. Actually,
yeah,
is to understand what are the challenges with young people from the audiences NGBs are trying to reach. With engaging with that sport. So we've
yeah.
done that with cycling, with table tennis, with various others. Just to ask that question, what is it about young people, perhaps from ethnically diverse communities that mean they don't engage with cycling in the way that others have and do? So some of that might feel obvious, but actually it's a really good bit of knowledge for NGBs to think about. Okay, well, how can we therefore respond to that? What is it that we can do? And so some of the programs that we've developed have gone on from those pieces where actually you've then created almost a cohort of interested organisations that say, oh yeah, we fed into that. Well, actually, there could be something that we could do there. I think the challenge is maintaining that sort of consultative piece throughout the development of a program. It's what's hard is to sort of ask a number of groups something and then go away and create something else and then come back and say here it is done. I think the challenge we suggest is actually to work with a number of organisations through the piece, so you're continuing to sort of shape and develop together. And I know there are NGBs that have done that, which is great. So I think there's plenty of potential around the NGB piece for that to grow. I think from a corporate perspective, we've had actually at Sported a lot of
Mm,
success in working with companies, partly through our background and our network, but partly because we've recognised the opportunity there is there to align or complement existing sponsorships that go on
mhm,
in sport. Of course, as you know, there are many sponsorships in sport from big companies. And one of the things they often talk to us about is the sort of marrying of their involvement with elite sport with the grassroots component to that, which is obvious and has been done lots. But I think increasingly they're recognizing there are many powerful stories that
mm,
exist within the sport development world that perhaps are deeper and more diverse and more powerful than some of the stories they perhaps have told previously. So we're really excited by that. I think people like Barclays, who we work with on the Barclays Community Football Fund, an amazing thing that invests in grassroots football groups to activate those that are, not likely to be, elite footballers at any point, but
mm,
actually really creating really wonderful stories at a local level. We've done some work with them. We're doing the same with Nissan around disability, and creating a network there. So I think there are those good opportunities, and often it's around identifying what the sport is delivering, right? So, a lot of people, come to us thinking it's about the sport, and we can dial that up if people are really interested in a particular sport. That's what they're funding. In Barclays' case, football.
Yeah.
But we can also dial up. Actually, here's really what it delivers. Here's the real power of what your support can do. So, I think collectively across the sector, there's a huge amount more we could be
Yeah.
doing in the corporate space, through sponsorships, through major events. That's, as I mentioned at the start, as my background. I think there's something really interesting about still the potential of major events, either by sport or, at a national, even global level. The legacy piece is really, really powerful for a cross-community response to that. So I think, there's something more about it. And actually, some of the things that we get very, worked up about within the sector, let's say are less of an issue within companies. So the robustness of data is something we talk about a lot. And,
Yeah.
yes, that's needed in some circles. In others, actually, the power of the story is really, really significant. So it's not that companies don't need that, don't get me wrong, but it's actually really interesting to see where their focus is and how the telling of an individual story or a community change is just something that really brings to life their investment and really resonates with them and either their staff or their customers. And that is the other piece about it, Andy. I think there's a hidden, resource there for us. A lot of our relationships aren't just financial. They're about profile and the recognition and the awareness of the stuff that I've talked about already, but also the engagement of staff. So often one of the first questions companies say to us is there a way that our staff can get involved? And for many that they're interested in the sporting element of that, but actually for many more, they're sort of saying, well, we could get involved. I'm a marketeer. I'm a finance guy. I'm a whatever. And actually, when you look at our network of 3,000, fantastic. That's an amazing opportunity, to try and match up some of your staff with some of our groups is just a wonderful connection and a really impactful way of using resource that goes way beyond the traditional things of painting walls or clearing, areas that perhaps team building might have been otherwise. So yeah, I think it's definitely an area that we collectively should be continuing to work in and have so much to offer that we haven't yet fully utilised.
Yeah, I used to run those programs years ago when I first started work. Those genuine investments in the community. So it wasn't, as you say, just not the clearing a bit of shrubbery or sort of like painting a
Yeah,
few walls, and actually the people who really benefited quite often were the individuals who do the volunteering because they had their eyes open to a different
exactly.
perspective, and that you
Yeah,
could see the energy, and then obviously sort of the long-term relationship with the company. They felt energized by that and probably stuck around a bit longer. So
yeah.
there's the double wins there, aren't they, for those sort of things?
Yeah,
So we do need
we've
to.
seen that quite often where there's been a sort of an ongoing connection with a group. So if you marry up a corporate office somewhere with a couple of groups locally, there's an organic connection that
Yeah,
develops over time potentially, where actually lots
yeah,
of things start to happen that are
yeah.
that we don't have to be involved with. It's
I was
just
going to
that's
say, if it
great, isn't it?
carries on, doesn't it? Even though you
It
move
carries
on,
on.
those
Yeah,
individuals and
exactly,
sort of can
exactly.
continue to do that. Um,
Yeah,
and they're great examples, really, of there's sort of slight difference as well, isn't there, between corporate giving and sort of probably philanthropic? Because I tend to find, I'm not an expert in this, but I mean, philanthropic do quite like the numbers. They've usually made their money because they're details people, aren't they?
yeah,
So you
yeah.
probably sometimes need a bit more sort of what's my money buying, what's the impact I'm having. Whereas I think corporates, I have found that probably do quite like some of the stories, and so we have to be prepared for both, don't we? We sort of have
We
to
have to be prepared for both.
back it
Yeah.
up, but I
And
think
we want them. I just mean that the
yeah,
question
no,
about impact and
sure,
demonstrating impact is one we've wrestled with for many years, as you
yes,
know. And I think what I mean by it is that corporates often they can see the impact through the stories that we
yes,
see, right? So whenever we
yeah,
take someone to see one of our groups, there's no doubting the impact there. How you articulate that impact in numeric terms or whatever
yeah,
is another thing. But actually, when you see it, you talk to a young person or a parent or a group leader, it's entirely visible, what the
yeah,
impact is. So I think
yeah,
that's the focus of companies rather than having
yes,
to see it all in
yeah,
numbers and,
yeah.
and big reports and so on.
Yeah. No, I get that. I mean, I'm fortunate, obviously, to come to a number, and we'll be going to joining you to the awards ceremony
Yeah,
soon. But these awards, the hits awards, those that are giving back awards, and all that, and you see these individual stories. I mean, I'm quite an emotional person, so I'll hold up my hand. The amount of times I cry at these things, it's sort of like
yeah,
phenomenal. For
yeah,
me, that's the bit. If you could just tell me you've done that to 100 people for this much, that's all I need to know.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Because the other bits, okay, it's not a criticism of other bits, but quite often we talk about changing people's lives, and I think we use the term a little bit too loosely when we're trying to sort of sell the
Hmm.
sector as a whole. But could you explain, Tom, I suppose, like where and we're a part of changing that life. I have sort of tried to emphasise that, isn't it? Is that the sport and the programme, there's other bits of life that need to change. Your housing needs to be sorted. If you're homeless
Yeah,
and or your
yeah.
education needs, and we can be part of that solution. So sometimes we do change lives, but we're only part of that solution. But it'd be quite
Mm.
useful again just to sort of bring that to life, this overused phrase and what it can look like. I'm sure you've got examples of stories where we have changed people's lives or turned them
Yeah,
around.
yeah. I mean, there's lots of examples. I think what
Mm.
struck me over the last few years, Andy, is a lot of it is about the mindset that's created amongst young people in those environments because of the
Yes.
kind of context they can find themselves in, all of the challenges that they experience in their lives, and through COVID and now cost of
Mm.
living.
Mm.
Life is a very difficult thing for them, and
Tough, isn't it?
actually, in the environment of a sports group, they feel safe, they feel trusted, they feel developed,
Yeah.
and they feel like they have some aspiration. And that word for me has really grown in sort of prominence in my thinking about our network.
Mm.
We really want to develop aspirations amongst young people in some communities where there
Mm.
can feel like there's nothing, or your future is determined for you. Or you've seen what's happened to your parents or those around you. You just think, well, what's the point? What's the point in education? Why wouldn't I go down this route? You
Yeah.
know, actually, the groups that I see operating are creating that sense of ambition and desire amongst young people that no, I can do this. I may just be doing it on a
Mm.
table tennis table right now, but actually I can apply that. And a lot of groups do work on those things, the application of their sport into their life, right? And this is how we deal with it on the field of play. This is how we translate that into exams or job hunting or dealing with mental health issues or whatever it might be. So I hear what you're saying, but I do think there are a lot of instances where it is transformation of people's lives, and young people in particular look back and say, if it wasn't for that, I don't know where I would be. So for every one of those, I'm sure there are many others for whom it's just an amazing thing to be part of, and it encourages them in right behaviours as well. But I think, particularly when we're looking at the most areas of highest deprivation, audiences that are, suffering in a variety of different ways, actually, a lot of the groups we work with and the relationships they hold there do sustain them. They genuinely do. So
Yeah.
again, how do you measure that? I don't, I don't know, but
I know,
but
and I was just saying we spent quite a lot of time trying to talk about measuring and impacts and all the rest of it, and it'd be useful to get your take on where we're sort of at with that. We've got a variety of different tools now, haven't we?
mm,
But there is a bit of, and I've said to you, and I think we both agree. I'm going to sort of join with you, hopefully, looking at visiting some of these groups. But I think even politicians, they just need to feel and see.
yeah,
No
yeah,
amount of PowerPoints are going to convince people, really, are they?
no,
Just we need to get out and see
it,
and meet some of these
yeah,
inspirational, sort of locally
I,
trusted leaders because they blow you away, don't they? In terms of the
they absolutely
entrepreneurism
do.
and some of the other skills,
Yeah.
they say they're not connected, but wow, they're some of the most impressive people you'll ever meet, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They really are, and what they achieve with what they've got
Yeah.
is just unbelievable. So yeah, and again to the point about being cost effective and so on. So I agree that is. I mean, I know that's not feasible always, but the sort of recognition across the different departments or different themes. This is what sport can do in that space. I think we collectively could do a better job of sort of demonstrating that in real life. So look, the measurement has always been a challenge, hasn't it? And we've tried
Yes.
lots of different ways of gathering that. We've produced lots of things as a sector, but it still feels like the most powerful thing is to see it, experience it, to hear from those people who, as you say, are often so eloquent. Some of the young people I see, and they talk about what they've experienced and what they're doing and what their plans are. You're just like, wow, this is. I mean, I wasn't like that when I was
No.
that age, with my background as well. So I
Yeah.
think there's a huge amount to be done in that, and maybe this year, with given the changes we're likely to see politically, is another moment for us to be considering how we best do that as a sector, sort of divide and conquer a bit on some of those things, because there are amazing organisations across the coalition, aren't there, delivering on brilliantly on specific themes,
Yeah.
in particular locations, using particular sports. So I think collectively we could do a really good job
Yeah.
of raising that awareness directly as well as sort of more indirectly through reports and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, it almost goes back to what you said right at the beginning, Tom, is that it's sort of slightly under the radar, so therefore it is difficult to demonstrate. So we sort of do need those big wow stats to say, hey, look, actually, 3,000 organisations delivering this much for this little,
Yes,
and this many
exactly,
outcomes
exactly.
is to be taken seriously. But actually, you do
Yeah.
need to just see those as well. So that is our
And
job,
an
and we're
Olympic
making
and an
progress.
Olympic and Paralympic year is an interesting one, Andy, because it raises
Yeah,
lots of questions, doesn't it? It raises profile of sport, and it raises profile of who is in sport, elite sport, and who
yes,
isn't. There'll be those questions, won't there, about the teams that are as they come out. And our response to that, I think, will be really important this year.
yeah,
So what are we doing? There'll be increased pressure, I assume, on some to be changing the nature of who they're working with and how they're working. And that opportunity for us is one that we should be thinking about how we, step into that space and recognise those that are already doing it. They're doing it. 82% of our group say they get young people active from the communities that we're talking about, that government are trying to reach through the Get Active strategy. So, the answers are
why
there.
wouldn't you? That's right.
Yeah, the answers are there. We're just not sort of supporting them to come out in at scale.
Yeah, it's both an opportunity and a bit of a threat, really, isn't it? It's an Olympic year because it sort of puts focus on one particular end. And I think
Mm,
what we've tried to just,
exactly.
particularly in this pamphlet, we've tried to demonstrate that it is complicated. It is from play right through to elite events and even soft
Yep.
power. Foreign Office using sport
Yep.
as part of its soft power stuff. I know. So there is this, and then there is a bit of a tension between those different parts, isn't it? And their understanding
Mm,
of each other. So hopefully this is as much as all recognising the other parts have got something to play, a role to play.
yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
entirely our bag at that end, or elite sport doesn't quite understand
No.
sport. But the discussions I'm having is now, especially around the social impact and athletes required, not just required, but I meet lots of athletes who just want to use their platform for social change,
Exactly.
wanting to have
Yeah.
discussions with organisations like yourself about how they
Yeah.
can use their downtime or their injury time to sort of give something
Yeah.
back into the sort of sector that's probably helped them along the way. So yeah, we just need mature discussions around what different parts of the sector can offer for people,
Mm,
can't we? So yeah, it could be an exciting year, but quite challenging if those
yes.
reports do show that the
Yes.
teams aren't really reflecting the nature
Definitely.
of the sort of UK population. Tom, you've run us through it really energetically and sort of like with enthusiasm, which is what I always love about yourself and Sported. You do remarkable work in sort of working with these community groups. And I guess I suppose just as a final opportunity, is there anything we've not really picked up in sort of the flow over the last half an hour or so of stuff that you think, oh, okay, yeah, I've not mentioned that. It's just probably worth making it or double emphasizing something. I
Double
mean, clearly,
emphasizing.
your cross government working, the ability of these groups, locally trusted leaders, easing the funding sort of mechanisms and things. They're all really helpful. But last chance, I suppose, is there's something else that's
Okay.
popped up while we've been chatting. Often is, isn't
No,
there?
that's great, Andy. I mean, I think it does boil down to that awareness piece for us. I think
Yes. Yeah.
we have been frustrated. In fact, I mentioned I've been probably in sport for development for nearly 15 years now. So there's been an
Yes.
enormous change in one sense in terms of the
Yeah.
recognition and understanding of the sector, or it being a thing. The use of sport
Yeah.
beyond physical well-being. That's fantastic. I suppose the thing that I would emphasise from a sported perspective is the safeguarding of these groups
Mm.
is really important. We lose groups every year. We've done a bit of work that estimates we deal with the tip of the iceberg in terms of the community organisations that are out there. We believe there are somewhere in the order of 50,000 across the UK. I mean, it's very hard to measure that again. But anyway, whatever the number is, it's way beyond the number that we work with and Street Games and others in the sector. So if you consider that, we should be thinking about how do we, increase our support across the piece to access all of those organisations, and not just with projects, not just with new projects that require people to start doing different things. It is that thing that allows them to continue doing what they're doing in the most
Yeah.
effective way.
Yeah.
And I think we're
We do
winning the
like
argument
shiny
on that.
things too much, don't we? New
New shiny
shiny
things.
things. Why do
That's
we?
exactly it.
Why do we love new
And I
shiny
think
things? 'Cause it's working.
in
Yeah.
in the challenging funding landscape that we're in, groups will see the shiny things and think, oh, well, we need, we should pivot to that then, and actually
Yeah.
that's unhelpful for them. And many of
Yes.
them aren't able to take that up, or certainly to take it up in a sustainable way.
Yeah.
So part of our role is to try and keep those groups true to what they were set up to
Yeah.
do, and our best positioned to deliver, and also to sort of guide those that are trying to tease them away from what they do, to say, no, let's, stick with what they're doing, because that is what's really needed. That is why they're there. And that is what will deliver the biggest impact for you, for them, for the community, and so on.
Yeah.
So I think as part of our messaging, it ought to be, let's empower local people in the ways that we can, to do what they do, because that is going to be, in many cases, the most effective thing we can do. So, yeah.
No, and well done on all the work you've done over the last probably decade or so as Sporthead, isn't it? Sort of like out of the 2012 Olympics and others. I'll admit, as a policymaker sitting on the other side, what I thought was sports was that sort of NGB world, Paralympics, Olympics, and the work that went around that. And it's taken me, probably a decade really to get my head around all the acronyms and all the sort of different parts of the sports sector. But it is important, isn't it? From play through to elite, through to the leisure centres and sort of gyms. And, we're all part of an ecosystem and different bits are important to different parts of the sector. And I think sport for development and the work that you're doing, Tom, with Sported is pretty crucial just to even just raise awareness that it exists, as you say. So the more we can do that, the more we can use it as a social tool to deliver many of the things that we want to do, the better. So yeah, let's continue to work together on that.
Fantastic.
And hopefully keep raising the profile of that. And I've come up with lots of ideas now that since you've been talking. We'll go offline and try and write some of those down before I lose them.
Brilliant.
But Tom, thanks ever so much for being with us. It's been a real pleasure, and I think you've articulated, what can be sometimes a bit complex, this sort of piece to others, isn't it? I think you've really articulated in a way that's made it really accessible for people to understand. So that's brilliant. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andy.
Cheers then, Tom. See you.
Then. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the latest podcast. Hopefully you found it helpful and you've gained some insights from our guest. If you have enjoyed it today, it would be really helpful to hit the like button and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. As always, feel free to pop over to any of our social media channels to comment or ask a question. Or sign up to our monthly newsletter at sportsthinktank.com. If you're interested in supporting our work at the Sports Think Tank, again, just head over to the website or drop me an email. Thanks, and see you again next time.